The great British public have a characteristically direct and to the point message for the political elite. We don't like you. Any of you, we think you all suck. Now, I'm going to explain just how bad things are for both the Tories and Labour in their own way. I'm also going to try and link it to a Tory politician who just died, the Chancellor of the Exchequer under Margaret Thatcher, Nigel Lawson. Going to bring all the strands together like a episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. Now, I'm going to start with the Tories, where we're at with Rishi Sunak, because according to the latest poll from Ipsos Mori, well, you could stop. Should we start with the good news for the Prime Minister? Let's start with the good news for him. His ratings have improved. Not all bad, is it, Rishi? Hey, cheer up. Up by 10 points since February. Very impressive. A slight down on that news. His ratings are bad. I'm going to be honest. 32% of the population are satisfied with him. And let's be honest, satisfied is pretty weak sauce because it spans from super enthusiastic to guess who'll do. 54% on the other hand are dissatisfied. Now, what's happened above all else is Sunak's improved among Tory voters, up by 21 points, with 3/4 of them satisfied. Probably a bit to do with Brexit and a bit to do with the Tories just being gratuitously bigoted and inflammatory and vile about migrants and refugees and Brits of Pakistani origin. Turns out Tory voters quite like a bit of racism. Not all Tory voters. In fact, just to be clear, because this is the other slight downer, there's not that many of the Tory voters left. According to the Ipsos Mori poll, they're currently on 26 points. So it's only 1 in 4 voters. So you're down to the kind of core of the Tories. And that's like the meanest Tory voters. Just to be brutally honest about it. I mean, I'm not a politician, I can just say what I think. Oh no, you're insulting the electorate. Some of them, yeah, I am, actually. Yeah, some people in Britain are mean, vicious, greedy, racist, and just unpleasant. They exist, they're out there, they walk amongst us. They're people who are rude to people who work in customer service, aren't they? And people who you can just tell from their demeanour are just horrible. Well, anyway, they're cheered up, the worst people in the country. So I'm glad Rishi Sunak's happy with that. The Tories have big leads on polling questions. The polling questions you don't want to have leads on, though, that's the problem. Like, we'll promise anything to win votes, divided and out of date. And they're well behind on the polling questions you do want to be ahead on, like concerned about people in real need in Britain. I have to say, though, a shout out to the 16% of voters who think that the Tories are concerned about people in real need in Britain. That is wild, though. Come on, guys. You're taking the piss there, aren't you? That's like a joke. That's just... Oh, got asked to do one of those surveys, and I just thought it'd be a little bit random and give completely batshit answers to some of the questions. Are you okay, though? Seriously. Anyway, they're behind on fit to govern, understands the problems facing Britain, and so on. Now, you might think, given how self-evidently buggered the Tories look, how can you say that the British public aren't going gooey at the knees for Keir Starmer? After all, Labour have a 23-point lead, which is landslide territory. So you could just say a lot of the Labour leadership would go, oh no, we're being slagged off by Owen. That's so terrible, given we're massively ahead in the polls. Like, whinge some more on YouTube. Why do we care? Fill your boots, Owen. Yeah, fine, whatever. You're ahead of the Tories on those key questions that I just named, the fundamentals, if you like. So we could just pack up this section and go on about how Keir Starmer's great and or go and worship at the shrine of Tony Blair. The problem is, though, if we just look at the, again, some underlying fundamentals, Keir Starmer's net satisfaction is about the same as Rishi Sunak's, which, as we've established, kind of sucks. There's no enthusiasm for Rishi Sunak, and there's no enthusiasm for Keir Starmer as well. In fact, Keir Starmer's net satisfaction has declined by 8 points since February. As the boss of Ipsos Mori, the pollsters behind this, puts it, if or when he wins an election, it is likely Keir Starmer will be the least popular opposition leader to win a majority in recent history. Normally, Blair or Cameron, you have to be well above net zero. He's on -20 for satisfaction. Now, I think it's just worth investigating that, because you should think, according to the kind of centrist so-called playbook, the Starmerites, the army of centrist dads, they don't like it when you call them that. I don't want to set them off in the comments, but you know, he should be walking on water. He's had the easiest ride from the British media of any Labour leader since Tony Blair and his pomp in the 1990s. He has had less hassle from Labour MPs than any Labour leader since Tony Blair in his pomp. The Parliamentary Labour Party have been like rats in a sack, basically, from about, I would say, 2006 onwards. So he hasn't had any of that. He's basically terrified his critics into submission because they think that he'll just kick them out of the Labour Party if they criticise him. The government has more spectacularly imploded than any government in British democratic history. They've won 3 prime ministers in a single parliamentary term, which is ridiculous because they've got a massive majority. But they've burned through the first two. The first because he systematically broke his own rules, and he broke the law during a pandemic which killed over 200,000 people. The second they burned through because she nuked the British economy with a completely deranged right-wing suite of economic policies, which included hiking house prices, which does not go down well with core Tory... not house prices. They like house prices going up. Mortgage costs going up, which core Tory voters are not that keen on. They've had relentless scandals, including under Rishi Sunak, from Nadim Zahawi and his tax to Dominic Raab and his allegations of bullying. The longest squeeze in living standards since the Battle of Waterloo, which is, I think, bad enough in its own terms, an unprecedented fall in living standards. Mass strikes, public services shredded, not least in NHS in a state of collapse. Starmer exudes this so-called competence, this air of competence. He's the former director of public prosecutions, don't you know? Keeps that quiet. He has these so-called centrist politics. I don't think they are. I think centrist politics is a misnomer. Another video. But nonetheless, according to these people, if you've got this plausible prime minister, this guy looks like he's grown out of a jar to be prime minister, plus these politics, that's the winning combination. They're constantly attacking the left. That's their big thing. Punch left, well and truly crushed. They've thrown Corbyn overboard. Everything should be on his side. I mean, there's loads of other things that should be on his side. On top of that, these are some of the headlines. So why is he personally so unpopular? He's not being torn to shreds by the media. You can't blame people like me, unless you think I'm God. What's striking is his collapse amongst Labour voters. So it's collapsed since February by 24 points. It's a fall of 24 points. February to April. That is ridiculous. 48% of Labour voters satisfied versus 45% dissatisfied. That is astonishing for a party leader to be so divisive amongst his own voters when that party is supposedly on course for a massive majority. It's not like Labour voters are dissatisfied because they don't think he's going to win. Because I think most Labour voters think he is going to win. So it's not we think he is an electoral liability that's holding them back there. Now, what's clear is his right-wing shift, his constant war of the left, epitomised most recently by throwing Corbyn overboard, a man he repeatedly called a friend, and then this week claimed he never called a friend, which is just ridiculous dishonesty of the sort you'd expect from Boris Johnson or Donald Trump, saying things which contradict what you've said on public record, trying to gaslight people and tell them that don't trust your lying ears and your lying eyes. Now, what's clear is Labour's polling lead has everything to do with Tory self-implosion, rather than people being enthusiastic for Keir Starmer. So according to, for example, polling on are they fit to govern, Labour on 38%, the Tories on 24%. That's a big lead for Labour. But actually, that's only because the Tories percentage has collapsed on that question. Because 38% is the same as what Jeremy Corbyn had back in September 2017. It's lower than the ratings Ed Miliband enjoyed. And he went on to lose. The difference isn't that there's been a massive increase in fit to govern for Labour. There's been a collapse in people saying that about the Conservatives. So what we're seeing is a collapse in enthusiasm for the Tories. It's not like people are going, well, Labour's got this great vision for the country, let's go with that. And this brings me to Nigel Lawson, which I promised I'd end on. Now, Seb Payne, who is a right-wing think tank guy, described him as one of the truly great chancellors. Britain's economy today owes so much to his foresight. Well, yeah, it does actually. Yeah, I agree with you, said Payne. The average growth since Thatcherism in this country has been much lower. In the 1950s, the average growth was 3.2%. In the 60s, it was 3.4%. In the 1970s, it was 2.6%. It was the same in the 80s under Thatcherism. Worth pointing out, because the 70s is demonised as Britain as an economic basket case. But the economic growth in the 80s was the same, on average, as it was in the 70s. It then falls in the 90s down to 2.2%. It falls again. 90s it's 2.2%. In the 2000s, it falls to 1.8%. And in the 2010s, it's on 1.9%, which is almost the same as the 2000s. But bear in mind, in the 2000s, it was a massive global crash. And what you saw in the 50s and 60s was you had strong trade unions, you had high taxes on the rich, you had nationalisation, You had strong government intervention in the economy, a strong welfare state. You can't say, well, this is post-war recovery that did it in the 50s and 60s, because we'd actually we'd recovered by the early 50s. And why is growth high in the 60s and the 50s? That isn't post-war reconstruction. So actually in the period of Thatcherism, which the economic model that Lawson built, because we live in the society, the economy that Nigel Lawson built, we have lower growth, but it's actually not just lower growth than we had in the 50s and 60s. That higher growth is more equitably distributed. Ours is more likely to be hoovered into the bank accounts of the rich. We live in the world built by Nigel Lawson. The things like privatised utilities, he flogged them off, like gas. How's your energy bills going, everyone? The housing crisis, the disappearance of secure, well-paid jobs in favour of a hire and fire service sector. Nigel Lawson built all of that. Now, what you can see at the moment is this economic model's come crashing down. The Tories are presiding over disintegrating services, rip-off energy bills, for example, stagnating and falling living standards. And Labour don't have an answer to it. Labour can't even commit to increasing capital gains tax, which is unearned wealth, to put it at the same footing as income, which actually even Thatcherism did. So they're actually to the right of Nigel Lawson. Brilliant. But that's the point. The Tories are upholding a broken economic model built by Nigel Lawson, and Labour are failing to offer an alternative to it. And because millions of people are struggling and don't see a compelling answer to the problems that they have, they don't like either of them, but they want the Tories out because the Tories have presided over one catastrophe over another. But that doesn't mean that Labour will win. Well, I think Labour will win the election, but they won't win it with enthusiasm. And that's when Labour store up problems later on. They have a core vote, which is pissed off already. That's what the polling shows. There's no enthusiasm for Keir Starmer when he becomes Prime Minister. So what does that tell us if Labour then don't deliver genuine answers to people's problems? How quickly will that government run into problems? And that is why the British public are fed up with a political elite that doesn't have any answers. And it's why if you think the years of crisis and turmoil are over in this country, then I think you better adopt the brace position. Please like, subscribe, and do support us on patreon.com/OwnJosephall. I'll see you in a bit.